Good evening, Britain. It's just gone 7 p.m. My name is Toby Mesme, and this is Sunday, the 10th of January 2021's edition of MesmePolitics, last one of the week. On the dawn of a brand new week with lots going on, bringing you all the latest in UK and US politics from a unique leftist perspective. For the next half hour, strap in, we're on. Hope your weekend's been good. Hope you've been making the best of it, despite the fact we're in a national lockdown. And I hope you're well today. Get in touch throughout the show, in the chat. Please contribute to the discussion of everything we're talking about. This is live radio, and we would appreciate that. Coming up towards the end of the show, I want to talk about Matt Hancock and his tough talk on lockdown restrictions and possible need to tighten them. And the implication that people are not following the rules and what may or may not be wrong with that assertion. Should they investigate Donald Trump? Should the Democrats spend their political capital on investigating a president that's heading for his second impeachment? Or should they save their political capital for big, ambitious planks of the Biden agenda? We discuss. But now, at the top of the show, I want to talk to you about Keir Starmer. He has rolled back on a key pledge regarding freedom of movement. What does that mean? What should the left's position be on freedom of movement with EU citizens going forward? All of that and more, next. And keep your messages coming in the chat, or you can email TobyJoshua2004 at gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at TobyJoshuaUK. Or, indeed, you can get me on Medium, and that's at TobyJoshuaPolitics. Thanks for getting involved. This is MesmePolitics. I'm Toby the Patty Mesme, and here we go. Keir Starmer has abandoned the commitment to free movement of people in the European Union he made to Labour members during the party's leadership contest. The Labour leader said his party had to be honest with the public, and that if it won the next general election, a major renegotiation of the Brexit treaty would not be possible. The deal, which was finalised on Christmas Eve, confirmed the end of free movement for Britons and EU nationals within each other's countries, because it kept the UK out of the single market, as the Tories promised in their 2019 election manifesto. This was said in an interview with the BBC's Andrew Marr, which we'll listen to now.
Matter of free movement of people. Huge numbers of people in the Labour leadership election and in the country voted for you on the basis that you would do that because you told them you would do that. The Daily Mirror asked you in specific terms, if you become Labour Prime Minister, will you bring back freedom of movement of EU citizens to the UK? And your answer was yes, look, of course.
Andrew, what I'm saying is this. We've had, 4 years of negotiations with the EU. The last thing anybody wants, including the EU, is to start again from scratch with this treaty. We have got to, for better or for worse, thin treaty though it is, we will inherit that treaty when we come into government in 2024.
So you won't reintroduce free movement. You said that back in January last year, so not that long ago. And also it was the 6th of your 10 pledges that you were going to bring back free movement. And now you're saying, no, I won't.
Well, Andrew, what I'm saying is we've negotiated a treaty, or the Prime Minister's negotiated a treaty. That now is the basis of our relationship with the EU. We didn't know what that was until we saw it just before Christmas. We now know what it is. It's thin. It's not what was promised, but whether we like it or not, that is going to be the treaty that an incoming Labour government inherits and has to make work. And, it is not being straight with the British public to say we can come into office in 2024 and operate some other treaty. We have to make that treaty work.
It's quite a moment to drop a pledge as big as that and say that a future Labour government will not reopen free movement of people. A lot of Labour Party supporters who may have rejoined the European movement and who desperately hope the struggle to rejoin the EU starts here and starts with you. We'll be very, very disappointed to hear
you. I don't think there's a case for rejoining the EU. I've said that before. I think I've said it on your programme. But I think pretending to the British public that somehow after 4 years of negotiation, the treaty that's just been secured is going to be up for grabs, and that the EU are going to start saying, let's start all over again. That is not realistic.
So we'll talk about whether he's right, but we'll also talk about the duplicity of what he's saying. This is pledge number 6 on Keir Starmer's 10 pledges. Defend migrants' rights, full voting rights for EU nationals, defend free movement as we leave the EU, an immigration system based on compassion and dignity, and end indefinite detention and call for the closure of centres such as Yarl's Wood. That's Keir Starmer. Another future is possible. Pledge number 6. Oh, that was a long time ago, that leadership contest. I really don't know if that was a cough or a laugh or a sob. It was one of possibly all of them simultaneously. So, unprecedented flip-flopping from Keir Starmer here. That's the first thing. He promised Labour members one thing because he knew the way to their hearts was through socialist Europeanism. So that's what he did. And then he knew as soon as he got into office, he was going to capitulate to trying to appeal exclusively to people in the Red Wall, in which case, middle finger to all the young people that he leached in with that. Just delete those old Insta selfies from the People's Vote marches. That seems to be what's happened. Unprecedented flip-flopping. It makes him look duplicitous. It makes him look shifty, sketchy, and otherwise inconsistent. He's not standing up for a principle one way or the other. That's a concern. A good answer on universal credit from Keir Starmer later in the interview. He said he does still support scrapping universal credit. We haven't heard any details of what he wants to use to replace it. That's a pretty concrete pledge, and it's something he will carry forth into government. So if Keir Starmer forms a government, an immediate positive would be the cruel universal credit system would be replaced with a fairer system, and that's an infinitely good thing. But of course, you'd have to see the proposals, what they want to replace it with. But I think that's an imminently sellable policy to the public. So good. He's left the doors open. Just listening more to this Marr interview, he's left the door open to things like the free broadband policy. He's basically deflected and gone, right, we're dealing with the immediate right now. I think if Labour want to commit, and they should, to free full fibre broadband, through partial nationalisation of BT, making it a commonly owned utility, and aiding small businesses, people, connectivity, economic productivity, all that, right across the UK with a modernisation and revitalisation of our infrastructure for the 2020s. They need to start making the case for that now instead of trotting it out immediately in the election, because trotting it out at the last minute, however well thought through a policy it was, people didn't believe it. We've got to... if you want people to believe it, start talking about it now and be really consistent and I'm going to argue the case for this. So he's left the door open on things like that, but it'll be a very big push to get him to accept a policy like that. And I think we need to start organising, mobilising, pushing for big, bold, progressive ideas like that going into the next election from Labour, because then they might stand half a chance. Keir Starmer was right during the leadership election when he called 2017, that manifesto, a foundational document for what he wanted to do with the Labour Party. So let's have more pragmatic democratic socialism and less Milibandist capitulation, please. Let's see that. Keir Starmer sold himself as a more competent or externally acceptable to the establishment type candidate who'd carry forth the Corbynite policy agenda. Obviously he was not, being honest, but let's see him carry those pledges, or let's see his own base and the party membership turn against him. I sincerely hope he keeps to what he says, and if he does, he has my full support and effort to get him into number 10. And I think I speak for most of the Labour left, or just the left in Britain generally, when I say that. If he comes out with the big, bold ideas, we will be behind him. It's not about the individual. There is a risk, particularly if the local elections don't go well or things just falter a bit, of at some point, when everything's calmed down, there's a lull, halfway to the next election, there's a cull. They get rid of anyone with half sort of progressive instincts, like Annalisa Dodds, and make it a cabinet of Rachel Reeves and David Lammy's, and shift to the centre fiscally, and basically turn it into the Miliband project, and fill a load of people who are arguably to the right of Starmer, politically in the cabinet. There's a risk of that happening. We have to organise against that. We have to fight. People like Annalisa Dodds. I had my criticisms of her, but she's one of the last bulwarks of serious thinking on big, bold, progressive policy ideas that were thought up in their droves during the Corbyn years. She'll repurpose those, and if she's given the bandwidth, she will put those in the manifesto. She'll work those out. She's really smart. So let's fight to keep people like her in their places and make a fuss if there's an attempt to remove them, build them their own power base, because these are the sort of people, and John McDonnell would agree with me on this, these are the sort of people that we need to keep in place. People like Rebecca Long-Bailey should be brought back in, but alongside that, we need to keep these people in place to keep Labour on the right track, because these people have sympathy for us, and they're friendly with our ideas, and you want those sorts of people round the table, not just Rachel Reeves, not just David Lammy, and those type of people, not just Kate Green. We want proper, serious, progressive, left-leaning politicians. Freedom of movement, alongside all this, the duplicity is one thing, but freedom of movement itself, with European citizens, is not politically tenable for the foreseeable. Maybe at some point in the future it would be a politically tenable thing to sell. Particularly young people would definitely buy into that. But for Labour to win nationally, they can't be carrying the banner for something like freedom of movement. So my quarrel isn't with what Starmer's saying. He's right. We have to make the deal work, and we can tweak things here or there. But bringing in freedom of movement in the next decade or two is just not going to be politically sellable to the British public. And of course, the model of freedom of movement, you could have a remade model of freedom of movement, but the model of freedom of movement adapted by the EU was generally used as a way to increase exploitation of workers and use flows of capital and movement of labour, coercive movement of labour. And on top of that, businesses being able to move from one place to the next, basically turn that into a wet dream for transnational capital. It was not about live, laugh, love abroad. It was more about free-for-all for Euro and British corporations. So there is freedom of movement. The principle is something we would support. It's something we would want to have in some form with most of the world, to be honest, or all of the world, but particularly our close neighbours in Europe. The way it's done through the EU is not necessarily beneficial, and helped foster unemployment in all the individual countries. It helped gut the productivity of economies in Eastern Europe and all these different things. It hurt a lot of people less financially well off than ourselves in this country as a nation. So there's a big progressive discussion to have around that. Broadly, the left in this country would be supportive of a thing like freedom of movement. In terms of the ability to move abroad like that, of course, I would support that as well. The scaremongering attacks about immigration, were obviously all nonsense, but it was a stupidly duplicitous pledge. He knew he wasn't going to keep up, and regardless of what we actually think, the political reality in Britain is such a thing would not be sellable or implementable for the next decade, at least, probably two. And come back to me in 20 years and we can have a proper discussion about it then. The slippery lawyer label will appear more and more around Starmer. He didn't say anything. He really didn't say anything. He kept dodging, saying we support the government, wouldn't have done anything differently on COVID, thus feeding into the perception that no government would have done any better, which is disastrous because it lets these charlatans off the hook. He talked about the Let's Vaccinate Britain thing, great, but other than that, and the universal credit thing, he had literally no positions, no policies, no leader that I've ever seen of a major party has been this timid. And we need more than this. If Starmer wants to grow from the point he's consolidated himself to, we need much more than this. The British public are ready to hear leadership. Let's see Keir Starmer offer leadership. Over to the States. And today, 12 years ago, when the last Democratic president took office, he did not seek broad inquiries into officials from the previous administration for their use of torture practices or for domestic eavesdropping, nor did he pursue prosecutions of Wall Street executives for crimes that led to the 2008 financial crisis. Aside from some grumbling, Barack Obama's party went along in the name of national unity. This time, Democrats who have chafed at President Trump's behaviour for 4 years are not willing to be so accommodating. They want to hold him, his family, and his enablers accountable for the acts they believe didn't just break norms, but broke the law. Whether or not the House pursues impeachment charges against Mr. Trump for his role in inciting his supporters to storm the Capitol on Wednesday, many Democrats say mere impeachment is not enough. Once President-elect Joe Biden takes office on January the 20th, wide segments of his party are eager to see investigations and prosecutions of an array of Trump aides and allies, an effort, they say, that would bolster the rule of law after a presidency that weakened it and serve as a warning to future presidents that there will be consequences for illegal actions. Sorry, I've lost the thread. Illegal actions taken while in office. That wasn't really worth the wait, was it? John says limited freedom of movement may be feasible for students, like Erasmus, but limited to that. I agree. Bizarre that we didn't, just pay up and keep the scheme. Things like that. Maybe some sort of permit to get you freedom of movement or something like that. These are all things we should be looking at. Obviously, this government won't, but a hypothetical government in the future could, with little to no political blowback, because people broadly support that. And those sort of the principles behind that. So yeah, let's look at all those sort of ideas.
We start with what's
and let's quickly get a report from Bloomberg on that.
We start with what's happening in Washington, because when President-elect Joe Biden is sworn into office on January 20th, President Trump will not be there. That would make him the first president to skip his successor's inauguration since 1869. Trump tweeted today, quote, "To all those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration." Pretty clear. On Thursday, Trump admitted for the first time publicly that a new administration would be taking over.
I am outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defiled the seat of American democracy. To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. And to those who broke the law, you will pay. We have just been through an intense election, and emotions are high. But now tempers must be cooled and calm restored. A new administration will be inaugurated on January 20th. My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power. This moment calls for healing and reconciliation. I know you are disappointed, but I also want you to know that our incredible journey is only just beginning.
The video message, a huge change in tone, also follows a wave of resignations from his administration, as well as calls from top congressional Democrats for Trump's removal from office over his role in inciting the mob attack on the U.S. Capitol this week. So for more on all of this, let's bring in Bloomberg government reporter Emily Wilkins. Emily, before we get to the inauguration and the drama there, let's get an update on the impeachment talk. Just how feasible are the Democrats' plan?
So at this point, Speaker Nancy Pelosi just spent about 3 hours on a call with House Democrats talking over impeachment options, hearing complaints, hearing concerns. We know at this point that more than 130 House Democrats have signed on to a resolution to impeach Trump for a second time. We are hearing discussion that a vote on that will be held early next week. House members will be called back to Washington. Of course, after that vote is taken and Democrats do, it seems like they might have the votes they need to pass it. But even if they do, it then becomes a question of what next. Usually the process would move to the Senate. But remember, we've got less than 2 weeks left at this point before Biden is sworn in and Trump is out. And so there might not really be time for the Senate to do much. And it doesn't really sound like there's the appetite either to do another trial like we saw at this time last year.
Right. But as the Senate has proved, it can get things done incredibly quickly. Witness the last Supreme Court nomination process.
A very accurate point there on getting things done quickly. This could absolutely be done if they want to do it. The case for broadly investigating President Trump upon his removal from office, I'm going to lay out my two strands of thinking and then offer my conclusion. But offer your thoughts in the chat, please. You are what make this show. We'd love to hear from you, and you are listening to MesmePolitics at 19 minutes past 7. So, in terms of investigating, as many sources have said, it sets a precedent. is a disincentive for a future demagogue to attempt something like this. It means they don't get off scot-free. Basically, it's the core principles of justice and accountability that are so rare in the United States. It would be a brilliant thing if a US president was, for once, had to account for their crimes. In terms of the case against it, it will quite possibly help Trump politically, rally more people around him, as it did at the first impeachment. If we have another impeachment, or indeed investigate him, it will sap the political capital of Biden. Possibly, we'll have a stillborn presidency that spent all its capital, all the goodwill, on partisan investigations, meaning they can't actually get any progressive political priorities done. It's really, really, really tricky, this. I think, in the end, justice does have to win out. It has to be done if it has to be done. This is not like the first impeachment, which was essentially a grudge being taken out on the president by the national security establishment, and it was very much he said, they said, she said. This time it is unavoidable. He attempted to... He tried to cause an insurrection, basically, and he tried to deny democracy, get results overturned in various states. That's demagogic and authoritarian, if anything ever was. Therefore, the principle has to be, we go forward and whatever needs to be done, be it impeachment, be it investigations. But it's very worrying in terms of what it means politically, though it may energise the Democratic base, which is a good thing. Morally, it just has to be done, right? That's as far as I can work it out. But as I say, the politics may be seriously damaging for the Democrats. Then again, maybe this is severe enough that they'll rally their base behind them, and the people who rally behind Trump just won't be big enough to surmount that. This is all to a point. We can't pursue this endlessly forever. We've got to remember we have to push on with policy. Democrats have a small window to get policy done, deliver tangible benefits to people's lives, thus securing their continuation in power. This cannot be allowed to slide, but equally, we need to focus on bold progressive policies as the priority. Let's remember how awful all American presidents have been, how awful the Bush administration was, how awful the Obama administration was, how awful the Biden administration will probably be. Most presidents in the last century have committed war crimes and basically been murderous bastards that haven't stood for any of the principles that they purport to stand for. So don't expect much different from the Biden administration, although there are progressive forces at play now in ways that there haven't been in American society, possibly since the days of FDR. And, we've just got to keep in mind it's not just Trump. This was not a problem that starts and ends with Trump, and let's keep the focus broadly on the problems in the system, not just Trump, because Trump is a symptom, not the cause of all those endemic problems. And that's just about all I have to say on the matter. Closing today, the story about Matt Hancock. The UK Health Secretary has said every flex can be fatal when it comes to compliance with lockdown rules, while refusing to rule out lockdown restrictions in England being made even tougher. In interviews, Matt Hancock said he also broadly backed the police decision to fine 2 women who drove 5 miles for a walk. Speaking on the BBC's The Andrew Marr Show, he was asked about the current rules, saying, "I don't want to speculate because the most important message is not whether the government will further strengthen the rules. The most important thing is that people stay at home and follow the rules that we have got." And in a separate interview on Sky's Sophie Ridge, he said the police are doing a brilliant job in very difficult circumstances, and people were right, and the police were right to take restrictions very, very seriously. Let's have a bit of Matt Hancock here.
Giving his own advice about not going out on a Sunday morning is the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Mr Hancock, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Can I ask, first of all, is the NHS close to being overwhelmed?
Well, the NHS is under very serious pressure, as the Chief Medical Officer said. It's probably under the greatest pressure it ever has been. And that's particularly true in some parts of the country, but frankly, it's true right across the UK, and we all can do something about it. The NHS has never needed everybody to do something more than it's needed that now, and that's to stay at home.
Your phrase has been in the past overwhelmed. How many weeks away are we from the NHS being overwhelmed?
Well, if everybody stays at home, and unless they absolutely have to leave, if everybody does that, everybody follows the rules, then we should see the case rate start to come down. Something to help, which is to stay at home, because every time you try to flex the rules, that could be fatal. And we all.
I'm sorry to jump in, but this sounds to me as if you think people are flexing in the rules, and you're worried that people are not observing all the rules as stringently as they ought to be.
Well, I think the vast majority of people are following the rules, and the data show that most people are staying at home. But you can see, it's hard. It's not easy. As
compared to
the
March,
professor just said, it's not easy. But if you can do something from home and you don't need to go outside of home to do it, then you should.
That's Matt Hancock on Mar there. So, a punitive approach and aggression is absolutely wrong in terms of this. We've seen police storming people's houses. We've seen grave emphasis on the rules, egged on by the increasingly authoritarian Priti Patel. It's wrong, and it's a breach on civil liberties, because it's not following the lockdown rules, it's breaching it, bursting into people's homes when someone had a cold in Scotland, or fining someone for driving 5 miles for a walk. These sort of things, they're not really the way to foster consent and compliance. Lockdown is absolutely necessary, it should be enforced, and people should stringently follow the guidelines. However, the state actors really, taking it to heart and going even further than necessary is wrong. And I think Matt Hancock was wrong saying that. I think Keir Starmer was right saying that some aspects, I believe I heard Keir Starmer say some aspects of it were a bit extreme in terms of those individual cases. They're rare, right? Broadly across the country, that's not our experience. In a few cases, there's overreach. That should be dealt with within the police force. We need to take a less punitive and aggressive approach, more of a carrot rather than stick. Give people the proper support they need. People are not getting the proper support or incentives they need, and the government, with its disastrous economic flip-flopping on support, its horrible handling of the pandemic, is losing this, and it's their fault, and they need to win that trust back, and they need to get this under control. That's on them. Talk to the business owners, forcing people to come into work rather than to the people that are following their bosses, because otherwise they'll lose their jobs. Tougher restrictions, however unsavoury, may be needed. If the government thinks this is not working, do it now. Don't prevaricate, don't wait. If you need to bring in a curfew or curbs on exercise or curbs on, traffic, gatherings in parks, whatever it is, bring it in now, and just do it. Just get it done. Do it this week. Make it all clear for us, because that's, there's no time to waste. The NHS is going to overflow. There is no time to waste. The duplicity from the government and the sort of saying one thing one day and then we have no idea what could happen the next day is damaging the government. We need honesty. The lack of honesty is damaging public trust in what's going on. Matt Hancock will not survive the January reshuffle. That much is almost certain. So at least that'll be satisfying to see, because he has been useless throughout. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but we need to bring back someone like Jeremy Hunt. Before you shout at me, I know he's awful. I know he's complicit in the gutting of the health service and other hideous, as if that's not enough, other hideous initiatives under David Cameron. However, he has said the right things, often better things than both Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock and Jonathan Ashworth have said. So right now in this crisis, he'd be a much better shot at this than Matt Hancock. The next health secretary has to be someone really experienced. Maybe Jeremy Hunt's too ideological, but someone like that. Now, who'd have thought I'd one day be calling for Jeremy Hunt to be health secretary again? The man was, one of the worst governments of all our lifetimes, the Cameron government. But in this crisis, we need someone who's thinking on their feet during this. And while he does say the right things, he's got an awful record. He has profited from private health contractors, but maybe he'd do a better job. I don't know. Who should be the health secretary? It's best of a bad bunch, right? But what do you think? Let me know. That is it from me today. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel, turn notifications on. We're back with you 7 p.m. tomorrow for Monday Night Show for a brand new week. Thank you very much for joining me. Tell your friends, get them involved. We want more and more people involved with this. We want it to grow. Please read my daily articles on Medium twice daily. That's at Toby Joshua Politics, or for my daily hot takes at Toby Joshua UK on Twitter. Thank you to everyone who got involved in the chat. Thank you to everyone who was listening. We had some good audience figures tonight. Keep up that energy, and I'll see you tomorrow.